Conversations across time. 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 Across time. Conversations 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 across.
Welcome. My name is Vivian Crawford, and this is, once again, Conversations Across Time. And as you know, the idea of this show is to allow you, the viewer, to just explore avenues of history that perhaps you've not thought about, personalities that you've not really understood, even though you might have been taught something about them when you were in school. You just don't know the skinny. So what we have done is we want to engage you in a fantasy that allows you to be voyeurs, to see conversations happen between people, of course, from differing time periods, and make your own assessment about who they are and what you think they've done to influence today's culture. So my co-host, who's always here, my dear friend and partner in crime, I guess.
Yes.
That's the only way to describe her, because that's what we do. We try to provoke conversation here. So Babette Josephs is co-host. Babette is former Pennsylvania State Representative Babette Joseph. So she brings a sort of an interesting look.
Political view.
That's a political view to today's issues. And seated next to my right, welcome back, Comrade Marks. Thank you for returning. I know this is the fourth time you've been here with this particular panel, but we're always pleased when you're here, and I thank you for returning for this panel.
Thank you for having me back.
Now seated next to Comrade Marks is the beautiful, and we say the French queen, but actually she was a French queen, but she was of Austrian background, and that is the lovely Queen Marie Antoinette. Welcome, Your Highness.
Bonjour. I'm just very grateful at this moment. My head is attached to my body.
Yes.
Which is not going to last very long.
Oh my.
Now, seated next to Her Highness Queen Antoinette is one of my favorite presidents. Every time I introduce him, I say the same thing, but I have so much admiration for you, President Roosevelt. Thank you, President Franklin Roosevelt, for joining us again this evening so that we can take up where we left off the last time. Because as I recall, when we left last week, we were in a pretty heated discussion concerning how the Japanese had been interred and the reasons why that happened.
And also, I think, whether we are on the brink of revolution and what the money class now in this country is trying to do and is doing to consolidate its power. And I think we kind of decided that if they're allowed to go down this road anymore, there will be a revolution in this country, which the comrade here thinks is a good idea.
I agree 100%, and it is a good
president
idea.
And the Queen probably don't, and I'm not sure.
And so I want to ask you, Queen Antoinette, because in today's climate, we have access to information. Obviously through media, through television, through printed media, but more importantly through the internet. There's all kinds of access to information. And I know that your background is as an Austrian, and Austria is a country of small villages, so I'm sure you were overwhelmed when you coming from a country that consisted primarily of these small villages.
Everybody's overwhelmed in Paris.
Yes, yes, okay, well, well taken. And so you, at your early age, 15 years old, arriving in Paris from that kind of background, certainly must have been overwhelmed by what you saw. And so my question to you is, what do you think would have happened had you had access to information like in today we have the internet and there's access to information? Because Comrade Marx talks about revolution and that he thinks is inevitable. Do you think you would have seen it coming?
Well, I have to say that I'm glad you gave our viewers a bit of background on my history, because coming from Austria and it being mainly small villages and coming into France and into Paris, and it was quite overwhelming by how many people were there, and being put in a place where you are supposed to be looked up to by your people and all those that are walking with you. And I have to say that I feel on our behalf, and especially on mine, that looking back at all the events that have happened, I feel that I was a bit smug, as well as the royal court and my husband, the king. I feel that there was a bit of ignorance also involved, where I didn't grow up in poverty. I didn't grow up in the actual area where people were living in and they were in despair. I had none of that. My parents were very protective of me. And coming to a place of power, I wish that there would have been more knowledge so I could have helped my people out instead of being blindsided. I felt that there were things that were going on I was not completely aware of myself. And I don't think I knew to what extreme my people were going through.
Now, it's interesting because, you know, when one thinks of the royal court, we have a notion that as the queen, or as royalty, you have access to information. But of course, you don't, because you're insulated.
Exactly.
You're insulated.
They tell you how to think, they tell you how to act, they tell you what to eat, more or less cake or not. They tell you many things. And you're supposed to act and quack like a duck, you know, be part of the whole stream and not ask any questions.
Now, and so President Roosevelt, what's interesting about your history is you were in a very insulated, homeschool, then prep school.
Wealthy family.
So as a member of the aristocracy, how is it that you came to be able to read what was going on in this country and see the suffering of people, and what you were able to accomplish as a result of having that kind of information?
I have absolutely no idea. It was just a process that I swam with. It wasn't anything that I was taught. It wasn't anything that I knew about. I didn't know about poverty when I was growing up. I didn't know about the State of the Union. I didn't know a lot of things. I was pushed and dragged into it, and I succumbed to it, and I believed in it. And it's really what it was. It was a learning process for me.
But didn't your wife?
This is before I was married.
Yeah, but when you were president, you still really didn't have that kind of touch with what the common man, like the coal miners, for example. I remember, at least I know, that your wife went down in the coal mines, and she said she had to be your, I guess, legs, and to talk about the plight of the coal miners. And my take on capitalism and the leadership, and the reason Her Majesty lost her head, and she articulated very well that they were insulated, is that our leaders are insulated also. I remember
Today's leaders.
Yes,
But to
today's
ask the Queen, I mean, there were huge bread riots, hunger riots, people.
They told me not to worry about it. It was none of my concern, that it would be taken care
But you
of.
saw it all.
To some extent, they didn't show me everything.
You saw thousands of people in the street, starving.
Well, it was very rare that I walked the streets, to be
And-
honest.
and
But I
our-
wish I would have.
Our presidential candidates, especially the Republican presidential candidates, see the same thing, and they have the same disdain and myopic view of it as the Queen had.
That's true.
So I see no difference. They're isolated. They live in gated communities. They think they're protected by security guards in their gated
Well,
communities, and the revolution will
They
come.
speak
And
directly to God, and that's why they're protected.
But Comrade Marks,
God has told them.
I want to.
I want Her
good thing
Majesty
God
to
tells
warn
them
the
all something a
American
little
people,
different.
unless they wise up and listen to what she said about not being insulated. She wished she knew more. She wished she were not oblivious to what was going on. She would have kept her beautiful head.
That
But
is correct.
I want to. I guess my question for you is, when you say that in today's climate, and as we sit here in 2015, and there's a presidential election coming up, and you alluded to presidential candidates who I mean, this has been a complaint. We don't necessarily have anyone in place who has, and you said it last week, and we keep saying it, it's the same theme, and forgive, I wish the audience would forgive me for repeating this, but we don't have politicians today who are cut from the same cloth that President Roosevelt was.
I think that President Obama had the potential
Yes.
to be of the stature
Yes.
of President Roosevelt. The problem was President Roosevelt was able to go through most of his administration with the ability to get certain legislation passed because the Congress was of his party. Even though in the beginning President Obama did have a Democrat,
He never really had a.
but the opposition
It's so
set out to
strenuous.
say, we will stop him no matter how good his program is, no matter how much it benefits the
with
country.
no respect for the good of the country or
Right.
the
May I
citizens
just-
in it.
And there were haters of Franklin, President Roosevelt. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to call you Franklin.
That's
I was
all
going to
off
say
with your
FDR. But there were his haters that used the same tactics and
Yep.
try to stymie him in any way they could.
That's right, but it works better against somebody who you can claim is not a citizen and who
Yes.
has a dark skin than it does against a
member of the
aristocracy
If
his
of the
name
state of
was-
New York.
Barack B. Roosevelt, he would have had less problem with Congress. You're absolutely
Okay.
right.
Yes.
It begins, excuse me.
Yes.
It actually begins and almost ends with one word: salesmanship. We have lost the ability to sell what our product is. And it's hurting us politically, it's hurting us socially, and I think that that's
I
the
think
one
President
product
Roosevelt,
is-
what's the product?
The
Capitalism
product is
that
foreign.
exploits the workers? What's the product?
Well, you know what I-
Yeah,
Product.
capitalism
Going
that
to the
exploits
Middle East and
minorities,
taking all their
capitalism that
oil.
exploits women? What's the product?
Well,
That's the
Comrade
product?
Marks, here's my question. I hope that President Roosevelt, when he says we've lost the ability to sell ourselves, I do hope that you are not in some indirect way giving credence to the candidacy of Donald Trump, because that's what he is, a
Well, I have
salesman.
to tell you this.
I
It's
hope that. I'd be
interesting.
so disappointed.
It's interesting that the most money being spent on television today, and the most free time, I might add, on television
Yes.
is dedicated to Donald Trump.
He's a
And the
salesman.
reason is that they think that he's another Jimmy Kimmel or one of the other comics,
Well,
but it's a serious matter
Sarah
because people are
Palin-
buying into it.
Yes.
And that's what's
Sarah
creating.
Palin had the same entertainment aura
Not quite. No,
around
no.
her.
I have never
Well,
laughed
but
at
she's
Sarah
a woman,
Palin.
that's why she's not getting the
But
biggest
you've never.
part
But
of
so
it, that's
so
all.
so may I say this, because back to your statement about salespeople. Donald Trump seems to be selling himself.
Well, he is.
Well, right.
And the media is helping him because
Yes.
they're selling papers and they're selling time. And every time he appears on a show, the rates go up.
Why don't
Right,
you
right.
say what it is? They're selling capitalism.
Yeah.
He's selling capitalism. He talks about it all the time. There's no better salesman for. I'm a millionaire. In fact, he had
I'm a
an argument
billionaire,
how much money he
Yeah,
was
but
worth.
he's only one billionaire.
Capitalism is a byproduct of what he's selling. He's selling Donald Trump. Because when this is all over, he's still going to be Donald Trump, and his empire is going to be larger, he's going to be richer, and the rest of the
I
world is
would
going to be
like to
poorer
talk
for it.
about the product of the United States, since you
Yes.
put it in those terms. Seems to me, let's take the Middle East. The product of the United States is to push those countries around as much as possible so we can take their oil.
Who
Right?
started that? You want to know who started
The
that?
British.
George Bush, the older,
Yes, yes.
the father.
But
He's-
the British started it
But
way back.
even before because we've actually
'Cause
talked
they
about
wanted
it.
the oil
Yeah,
too.
even before George Bush, Daddy Bush, became involved in the Middle Eastern politics, there had been a history under a guy that you probably know because he was coming along at Sullivan and Cromwell during the time of your presidency, and that was John Foster Dulles. I mean, the British got together with John Foster Dulles and they arranged a coup in Iran to take the oil. I mean,
and then they looked at South America
Yes.
and the companies that were using their agriculture, importing their agriculture, and they pushed all those countries around in order to exploit
And
that.
anytime
United
there was
Fruit.
any reform in those countries,
We overthrew
that
the
we
government.
overthrew the government or assassinated the leader who wanted to reform it. And most of those leaders were followers of my philosophy that wanted to make the life in
Yes.
those countries better for the people. And we intervened and assassinated some of them, like
Yes.
Allende.
Allende,
And
yes.
we overthrew some of
From
them.
Chile.
And who do you think did that?
The CIA.
The CIA.
you know,
Dulles
I-
brothers.
The CIA.
They own more land in Central America than the Central Americans.
So
Oh,
let
yeah,
us
there's no doubt.
let us talk about how, under the color of being a public official, a public servant, that we have people like the Dulles brothers, or that we have instances in our history where
Koch brothers.
the Koch
Yeah,
brothers
there you go.
currently. I mean, when you look at that, how do you as a former president look back at this country today, look at this country today and compare it to where it was when you were here? I mean, because you at least had the wherewithal and the common sense to make certain that everyone ate. That everyone, as long as they were able, they had jobs. As long as they were willing to work, that there was a way for them to make a living wage. Can you talk about some of your programs that no
Sure.
longer, that are under attack now, especially Social Security?
Well, let me just color it a little bit, if I may.
Okay.
And that's that the problem we have in this country right now with the hierarchy is that everyone seems to be for themselves. And they don't care about the little person or the middle person. They care about only themselves and enriching themselves.
You mean
How
their
can I
class.
make it
You
better?
don't mean
You're
themselves.
100% right.
You mean their class.
Right.
You don't mean
Corporate
themselves
class.
individually.
No,
you mean
but
their
they
class.
belong. They all belong to something because they all have to stand together. Because
Well, yeah, but you're
going to
talking-
hang together or hang
yeah, but you're-
separately. You know, it's. There is
See,
no
I
way.
don't really
There is
buy
no
into
way
that.
to correct this system right now. He's 100% right, and I hate to agree with him.
You've
Because
agreed with
it's,
them
Twice.
Right,
Yes.
once this week, once last
You
week.
may have a way to correct it because you have somebody that's attempting to become president who may be able to put a Band-Aid on it if he's elected.
Needs
and,
more than a Band-Aid.
And that would be Senator
Bernie
Sanders.
Right.
And he has ideas that are very similar to yours. In fact,
Well-
I think
Yes,
he may
wants
be
to
you
bust up the
reincarnated.
banks. He wants to bust up the big
Comrade Marx, I will
corporations.
tell you this. If I was alive to vote, I would vote for him.
And he would have voted for you, and he might have been alive. No, he's not
I'm
quite
voting,
that.
I'm voting for Hillary.
I just want to.
That's the woman in you.
That's right.
I just want to say that
There's more women voters than men.
as
Yes.
as a tease for our audience, we are hoping to have Senator Saunders visit us. Yes, that's a big get if we get
Well,
it.
I would
but it's
hope
a
that he
big get.
comes, that I am invited to his,
That would be great.
No,
Swearing
definitely.
Definitely, that would be great. So, can you talk a little bit about some of your programs? I mean,
I can talk a lot about some of my programs.
What
The
programs could you institute today that would solve some of the problems, especially income inequality, that you had back then?
Oh, that's-
Well, okay, I
a
would
great
say this.
question.
The most important thing in my judgment right now, well, there's several, but one of which is the national road system, highway system. That has to be and it has to be corrected not only in the national highways, but the inner cities. If you drive through a city like Philadelphia,
Yes.
which I've had occasion to do recently, it's a disgrace, and it's repeated in every major city in the country. I would like to know where all these dollars are going, because they have been available for many, many, many years. These programs have been in place in statute for many, many years.
Now, so
They're not
remember,
being
Just
funded.
doesn't appropriate, that they.
They're not being funded.
Won't appropriate the money, they're not being funded. But I really do not believe that people are any more selfish now than they were then, or they're not going to be more selfish in the future than they are at this moment. I think we're just seeing the way capitalism works, and the fact that people who are of the moneyed and powerful class want to stay there. And they are not cognizant of the fact that they might lose their head because they cannot
correct.
believe it, because they're so secure. They're so secure.
and isn't
And
that
what
the
we
way
need
she
in
was?
this country, yes, what we need in this country, we're going to lose all our coastal cities in the next 50 years. They're going to be flooded. We need to employ everybody
Infrastructure.
to move the cities.
You know,
That's what we need to do.
we first of all, we have to address several situations. Number one, we have to change the mindset of the people who are running our government, the
We
Congress
have to get
particularly.
rid of them.
They
You
have-
can't change
they
Cut
them.
all
really-
their
Thank
heads
you,
off.
Elizabeth.
Yes.
Thank
they
you. You
should
never
be
change
is
the
arrested.
mindset.
Because I
There's
consider
something
most
they
of them
say in
committing treason.
politics, you know, if you can't change their minds, change their faces.
There you go.
Change
That's
your
what
what?
we,
Change their
faces.
faces.
We need to change their faces. We need to elect people in state legislatures and in the congressional legislature who really want to serve their people.
Well, we have to elect people who are inoculated against the disease that our current politicians in Congress particularly have.
But
And
how
they're
do you
all
do
in the
that?
same rowboat. They all want to make as much money as quickly as they can and live the life of Riley
want to
afterwards.
protect their-
Their
but our
pensions.
power.
They want their pensions protected. They want their health care protected. All the things that they want to deprive everybody else of,
They
they
want
want
to
to
protect.
keep.
Of course.
Exactly.
And I
It's all
would
too
say this as
familiar.
president, I wouldn't
That's what
permit it.
that's what Comrade Marx would tell you capitalism is about.
Well, he's
That's what
not,
it's
he's only half
about,
right.
and everything that is going on now, I predicted.
Yes, you did.
Yes.
It's right in Doc Capital, it's right in the Communist Manifesto, everything that's going on. The divisions between the classes.
But you didn't have
The-
television.
It's
The
been going on
division
from speakers on soapboxes to the mass media.
It's all the
The
same.
capitalists, the bourgeoisie, once they gain power, they control the means of production, they control the government, they control the media, and therefore they control the population. And until there's a revolution, and there will be, because people will become desperate. What is happening now is you're seeing the microcosm of desperate people acting in desperate ways because you need food, you need jobs, you need education. There are rights, not
Healthcare,
privileges.
lots of things.
We should have free, in this country and with our system.
Well,
If you look at,
outline-
as much
outline
as
the things
people
we should have.
criticize communism, in communist countries, they have better health care in poorer countries than we have in this
I was in
country.
Cuba.
How's that possible
I was in
when they
Cuba.
have less resources but better hospitals
hospital.
and better health care?
Where people just lined up to see a doctor.
How's it possible that communist
Didn't
countries
cost
with
them.
far less resources or socialist countries have better education system and free education systems, and kids can go from kindergarten right through to a PhD without paying?
Yeah, but you're-
How is that possible except for the controlling class not wanting it to happen? What would happen in this country if everybody were educated, everybody had a job? You could not control them the way you do now. And
Right.
that's the function
You
of
wouldn't have
capitalism.
Ferguson if
Because there's
everybody had a
never,
job
right,
and if
there's
everybody
never,
was
there's never
educated.
enough. The greed is insatiable.
Yeah.
There's no satisfying. Mr. Trump, he bragged. You know, he said, I'm worth $8 billion. They said, no, I'm worth $10 billion.
Who cares?
Who cares? And
The
why
little
brag
guy
about it
cares.
when somebody
Wants to be him.
somebody 20 miles away is
One thing I keep thinking about him, he and I, we're the same. I have one vote, so
You
does
what?
he. I have one vote, so does he. My vote is for Hillary Clinton. I'm canceling him out. I don't care who he is.
You're wrong, and I'll tell you what it is and why. He doesn't have one vote. He's got $100 million votes. That's what he's buying. He's buying votes every single
That's
day.
what I think the internet is for. That people get together and they talk about what they don't like, what they do like.
But
and
again,
they
that's back to.
they form independent judgments.
But that's back to the question of information. When I asked the Queen, well, how did she think things would have been different if she had access to information? And I think that's where we are now. Is that we're in a time where the information is available, and unfortunately, people just don't seem to have access. They seem to be voting against their own
I
interests.
think people get depressed and they don't vote at all is what the problem is, because they feel like their vote doesn't count.
That's true.
But they do come out in presidential elections, and you will see a candidate.
But that's not enough. See, that's
No,
the
of
problem.
course it's
They
not
have to
enough.
come out
But
for
the
the local
minorities
elections.
don't. The minorities have a tendency to undervote.
But
Not in
when-
presidential elections.
Not
Yeah,
right.
oh, yeah.
They vote
Presidential
presidential
elections.
elections, but they seem not
And
to get
what's
the
happening in
importance of
state
local
after
elections.
state after state, and it happened in our state, but fortunately the Supreme Court turned it off, is things like the old poll taxes, but they call it voter ID.
And how about gerrymandering?
Well,
yes.
I mean, that's
yeah.
one of the biggest problems we have in this country.
Well, right, but it's hard to do that with the Senate, fortunately.
Yeah.
So, but everything else is
Well, in the
gerrymandered.
Senate-
But
money
see, but
counts.
what's interesting about this is the problem with this is that when we, as a minority person sitting on this panel, when we are talking about elections, for some reason, there is such a resistance and a reluctance of minorities, people who look like me, to come out and vote in local elections. They just don't seem to understand how important it is for them to exercise their vote in local elections. So then you get people elected to state office, and they go in, and what do? They are subject to something that
Well,
you alluded to
Congress,
earlier, and
too.
that's the lobbyists.
But what we're
because
also-
they're pressured by lobbyists who give them things to vote the interests of whoever they're lobbying for, whatever company
Salesmanship.
they're lobbying for.
But
Salesmanship.
what we're talking about is how corrupt
No, we're talking
government
about
is.
money and
Constraints, and one of the constraints is
we're
that
finished.
we are out of time. So I have to say, thank you for joining us for this animated discussion. Comrade Marx, Queen Marie Antoinette, and President Franklin Roosevelt, and of
And
course
the
my
two of us, of course.
sidekick, Babette Josephs, and me, Vivian Crawford. Maybe in the
about this.
future
Think about
we'll
all
return to
this when you
conversations
watch
across
it.
time. Yes.
Conversations across
Okay, so that's it. That's a wrap.
Conversations
Thank you.
across time. Conversations 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 across time. Across time. Conversations 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 across time.